Welcome, welcome everyone. We're super excited for today's digital panel on managing the whole person, mental health at work. We're going to give everyone just a couple of minutes to join. But until more people join, we like to spin through a fun little icebreaker with our moderator and panelists just to help make them more human to the audience. So we're going to kick off this session with a fun little icebreaker. Where is everyone most looking forward to traveling? Sanj, I'm going to let you answer that first.
I am looking forward to traveling to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I'm from originally, and visiting my parents with my kids. My dad's like really into water parks, and his his bucket list item was taking his grandchildren to a water park. So I'm sure seeing the joy on his face will be worth something.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That's a good answer. Just looking forward to family experiences because a lot of them have been put on hold for the last year. CJ, how about you?
Well, since I have been up in Ohio for the last year and 1 month, supporting my brother through COVID, I am looking forward to driving the 8.5 hours back to my home in Greensboro, North Carolina, and seeing my condo for the first time in 13 months.
Oh my goodness, that's going to be a good...
That will be nirvana.
Yes, totally. Your self-care, if I may say, is getting back home. Ashley, how about you?
Yes, ma'am.
So when my kids get out of school, we are heading to Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. We recently just bought a camper, so we will be taking it with us and hitting up Dollywood and some of the Ripley sites and just having a really good time with the kids and kind of getting out of school and virtual world and celebrating.
Awesome. I love that. And then Brian, last but not least.
So my wife and I planned a cruise for the Mediterranean in October. That's going to be exciting. She's never been to the area that we're going to. Specifically, she's not Italy or Spain. And she actually has extended family still living in Italy. She's surprisingly never been there. But so yeah, that's going to be a fun trip after not having really gone anywhere for the last, for us, it's been actually closer to 2 years.
Yeah, same. I think a lot of us, we weren't expecting the shutdown. So that 6 months before, we would have optimized for traveling if we had known, of course. So thank you everyone for spinning through that. If you're just joining, we'll go ahead and get started. We just spun through a quick little icebreaker. So welcome to Managing the Whole Person, Mental Health at Work. This is a special edition of the MSP event because it's a little less revenue focused and a lot more the whole professional focused. So we're excited about it. And before we dive in, I just wanted to set a little bit of context about this specific event. As you may have noticed, our moderator, Sanj, is an active MSP member and sponsor. However, our panelists today aren't revenue leaders. We did this on purpose. Through these Modern Sales Pros DE&I events, we hope to expose you to a new way of thinking and new perspectives. And today we're here to have a vulnerable conversation with these three incredible professionals who all manage different types of mental health related divergences and are supporting their entire 1,200 person organization in doing the same through their employee resource group. In a few minutes, we'll dive into who these amazing folks are, why they have an important perspective, and how to make an impact in your own organization. But for now, we're so grateful that they're willing to be a part of this session. Vulnerability is never easy, and we're incredibly thankful to Julie Greenfield, who introduced us to these amazing individuals. So with that being said, if you don't know what MSP is, we are a 20,000 person peer education community specifically for revenue leaders. Our goal is to help our community answer the questions they otherwise struggle to solve. If you are a revenue leader and attending today and not a part of the community, you'll be added shortly. If not, and you become a revenue leader in the future, we'd be happy to have you. And then a huge thank you to Sales Loft and Chorus. There are officially unofficial DE&I event sponsors. They help us make these DE&I events possible and continue the conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion in our community. Before we dive in and I pass off the mic to Sanj, who is our lovely moderator today, I just wanted to run through one housekeeping note. You'll notice that the chat panel is closed for attendees. Please use the Q&A panel to ask your questions, add comments, and engage with our speakers. You can upvote others' questions and comments in the Q&A panel, and the speakers will be able to engage with your questions as well. Everyone can comment on each other's comments and questions in the Q&A panel. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it off to Sanj, and I'll be back for Q&A later.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks to everyone for joining today's webinar on managing the whole person mental health at work. I'm really, really excited that I was asked to moderate this panel because, you know, at Concert, one of the things that we really think about is how people do their best work. And the thing that we say internally is that compassion is better than competition. So kind of recognizing people's divergences and creating safe working environments is really important to that part of the conversation. So I would love to introduce you guys to our panelists. Ashley, Brian, and CJ, if you guys could tell us what you do at CentralSquare Technologies and you know why your perspective matters in this conversation. Ashley, could you get us started?
Sure, thank you, Sanj. I'm Ashley Dean. I am a project manager by trade for about 5 or 6 years now. I've been with CentralSquare a little over a year. I am not an expert by any means, but I have been diagnosed with anxiety for a couple of decades, more recently depression and postpartum depression, and also PTSD. So I've had many years to kind of dig through these experiences, live with these experiences, and can give you the perspective of, I guess, just real life and what it is to me.
Thanks. Brian, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm the facilities director for CentralSquare. My job, you know, as it pertains to the physical environment that people work in, I think is specifically important to a lot of conversations about diversity, especially inclusion of the disabled workforce in that environment. You know, we deal a lot with, you know, being able to access different parts of the office and mobility problems, making sure that everybody's individual needs are met. Specifically for me, ever since I got out of the Army, I've been having to contend with PTSD and a wide host of other physical mental issues from, you know, just time in, physical strain that is put on the body during service and deployment, stuff like that. You know, came out of it with PTSD, anxiety, sleep apnea, nightmare disorders, and then a whole slew of joint problems, essentially. Won't bog everybody down with those, but so it's particularly interesting to me, being what I would consider to be, I guess, relatively young and able-bodied, seeing how the physical environment that I'm specifically responsible for, how it can affect, you know, my physical capabilities and disabilities, being able to translate that and really negotiate how that's going to be for other people and what I can do better to facilitate those with, you know, mobility issues or less ease of access.
Thank you. And CJ, could you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Sanj. Hello, participants. Yes, definitely. Welcome, participants, and I'm honored to be speaking here. I'm CJ Casuto. I'm a project manager at CentralSquare, and I think that why my experience is relevant is prior to joining CentralSquare, I was an Air Force officer and I was injured in service, and I was injured significantly with a lot of joint surgeries, and then my heart was impacted, and so the life that I had prior to those injuries was quite different, but the life I have now is really amazing. And so in coming to CentralSquare and being a disabled person working in the environment, with my history, I wanted to bring that awareness to the organization and help, like Ashley and Brian have discussed, to foster an environment that's inclusive, where diversity and inclusion is honored and understood. And later we'll talk about our employee resources group, of which I'm the chair, but I have been able to leverage that in participation with Ashley and Brian and the other members of that ERG employee resources group, to bring that almost daily to CentralSquare. And it was out of that adaptable event that we're here. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you guys. And if we flip over to our agenda, hopefully from the introductions that Ashley, Brian, and CJ shared, you can tell that they're incredibly passionate about this topic, and they're giving real talk today. They're really, really sharing kind of their honest experience, which is great. So today we're going to go through what CentralSquare and this team is doing with their Adaptable Employee Resources Group, and kind of talk about how they're helping support their organization that way. We'll go into a little bit about how mental health has impacted their work life, both personally and with their peers and managers, and how they're managing those relationships. Then we'll have the team kind of teach us how to become our own advocates at work. It's really hard to help and support others if you don't have that help and support yourself. And then kind of tie this back to the business. How do these issues and this support tie into hitting our goals, especially as a sales community, if we're kind of under the threat of hitting quota every month or quarter? How do you balance those needs? And then finally, how do we take these lessons and create a really open environment? So if we can move on, CJ, it would be great if you could tell us a little bit about the Adaptable Employee Resource Group at CentralSquare. This was something that when you guys were first describing it to me, it sounds like really amazing, and it doesn't seem like every company has something like this.
Sure, it will be my pleasure. First, it's kind of amazing and awesome to see our Adaptable logo embossed like that and shown in this deck. It's wonderful. In fact, we consider ourselves adaptable because all of us have had a situation that we've had to adapt to with our mental or physical health. But all of us are just as able as ever before, if not perhaps in a different fashion, but still able to do amazing things. Adaptable is one of several employee resources groups that we have at CentralSquare. For example, we have Adaptable. We also have the other ERG that I co-chair, United in Service, which is for first responders and military persons. We also have LGBTQ plus, and we have experienced learners, et cetera. And what all of those ERGs do is to bring diversity and inclusion to CentralSquare as a whole. But an Adaptable, and I think Brian spoke to it already, it's just a group to really help those of us that are differently abled to be able to navigate and be understood in the environment in which we work every day. And our job, I think, in leading and sponsoring that ERG for our peers and our leaders is to just make sure that everyone's aware that there are different people in our workplace, and being different doesn't make us any less able or any differently aligned to our need to be understood and embraced. And really, that's what I hope as the chair, and with a great participation of Ashley and Brian and others on that ERG, to do that all the time.
Great, thank you for that explanation. It's an amazing group. Ashley, can you tell us a little bit about some of the work that you've done as part of this ERG?
Yes, so We kind of started, of course, with developing our mission and developing the group itself and doing recruitment. We have our leadership. We have an executive sponsor from the executive leadership team. The chief technology officer is our sponsor and attends our meetings, and our entire executive team really, really promotes and pushes. And so it's been fantastic to really feel like the leadership of the company engages with us, and this is just as important to them, and they let they push the employees to lead with what we feel we need. From there, we've sent out surveys to find out, what do people want from this group, what do they expect, and we have created some safe spaces for people to just kind of share. What is your disability? How does that make you feel? How can you talk about it at work? We've also brought in a holistic chiropractor physician to speak and work with just how can you be your best self, being mindful, doing some exercises and just goodness for yourself at work. And he was in such high demand and it was so successful, we've brought him back again. So that was fantastic. And then we did a panel discussion very much like this that was moderated by our CTO, and where we spoke not just about mental health, but about being at Central Square with a disability or being differently abled and what that's like. And we took questions and we had a really good turnout. And from there, we got plugged in with MSP. So I feel like our message is really getting put out there. We have a few other kind of projects in the works, especially with getting back to the office and discussing the anxieties of going back into the office and feeling safe and um, just changes with life again, change management again. So that's just some of the stuff that we're doing. We've only been started since last October, I think was our kickoff meeting. So a lot of work has been done, but a lot of work to be done moving forward.
That's amazing. And anything to add, Brian? Any additional things that CJ or Ashley might have missed out on?
No, I think they pretty much hit most of them. My specific involvement with the group is as the events coordinator, so my job's been pretty light since we're all out of the office and everything's pretty much virtual. We've put on a couple of events and helped sponsor some other events or some other ERGs. And we're just waiting to get back to the office and get everything back going normal again.
Awesome. Well, part of the reason why we're having this conversation this month, moving on to the next slide, is that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Every year, 1 in 5 adults has a mental health issue in their life. And currently, with the environment of COVID, I read a stat that Spring Health was saying that something like 76% of employees are reporting that they're totally burned out or depressed or anxious about their return, like Ashley was mentioning. So this is a really important topic. Ashley, can you share a little bit about your personal experience with mental health?
Yes. So I did have a traumatic childhood, and there is an extensive history of mental health in my family. And I know there's a lot of debate on whether mental health is nature, nurture, and genetic, and all these different things. I think that the answer for me is yes. If it was any of the above, I have all of the above, just from genetics and from environmental. So I have dealt with anxiety since I was a teenager. I dealt with misdiagnoses. I dealt with some not great professionals as far as psychiatrists, and gave up for a little while on getting treatment and getting help, and finally found a doctor that just got it. Right about the time I started having physical attacks and I had to go to the emergency room, I had a doctor that was just a family PCP, and she really engaged with me and really listened and knew I had some bad experiences, and she found what was right for me. So I got on the right medication, I got the right kind of counseling, and then later in life, I was diagnosed with depression. It got worse with my second child. I experienced severe postpartum depression, and since then have had to deal with just kind of waves or bouts. And then more recently, I was diagnosed with PTSD that was probably not caught because of all the anxiety and depression. So I hit it from all the angles. I try to, I make sure I do my meds and stay on top of that. I make sure that I do have that therapy component. And then I also work at it from a spiritual and educational standpoint. I try to make sure that I educate myself on what are the parts of me that I need to be aware of and mindful of, and how can I respect that about myself, respect those boundaries, and also put it to my advantage. Part of having anxiety, and I honestly hate that term because everybody can have anxiety and everybody can be anxious, but that is not what an anxiety disorder is at all. Um, it makes me better in a lot of ways at the things that I do. I'm incredibly type A. I'm incredibly aware. And part of anxiety is constantly what ifing. And it's what ifing worst case scenarios. So,
So as a project manager, that might be a little bit to your advantage.
Yes, it makes me a very good project manager because I can what if and plan B and plan C and plan D. And I'm always an overachiever because I want to reach perfection. I want to make a good impression. I have to control that self-doubt. And so, working really hard to make those good impressions and to be that overachiever, a lot of that has, and it took me a long time to realize that a lot of that is because of my anxiety. And um, when I embraced that and when I learned to love myself because of it, it made a huge difference in how I respond to my mental health and how I respond to my anxiety. My anxiety is telling me something. It's telling my body something, and I have to learn to listen to it. And every day is learning. Depression is not as easy to look at that way. That one's a little more hard to manage. Again, everybody can be depressed. It is an emotion that anybody can experience, but true depression where it hurts your soul to exist, and you just feel like you can't get up, and then you also have anxiety, and so it's battling each other because you didn't accomplish anything today because you stayed in bed all day. Um, it's a constant management. It is something that I live with. It is a part of who I am, and embracing that and learning that, and um, just kind of being mindful of that is kind of where my experience has brought me to today.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Brian, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with mental health?
Sure. So journey for me started 8 years ago when I discharged from the Army. I'd spent a year in Afghanistan, and during the course of that year, came across some traumatic events, as they'll call them. And, so coming back from that, I didn't really identify that I had a problem. I carried on about my life doing the things I normally do, which if you're in that type of environment, bunch of alpha males that like nothing but adrenaline rushes, then there's a lot of drinking, a lot of staying out, partying late, whatever. So there are a lot of mechanisms already in place to cope with that, that were not for my good health. And I, just continued to feed them because, that's what I knew to do. It wasn't, I was, actively trying to subvert my traumas or anything. It was just a kind of a mixture of convoluted things that, unnecessarily fed into my own problems. So it wasn't until a couple years later that, through talking to some other people and seeing what was happening to other guys I was deployed with, really kind of struck home. And even more so with me because my brother had deployed few years before I did, had a trip with him, and he went through obviously some very similar experiences, and really seeing how bad down the road you can get basically by looking at him made me acknowledge that, okay, maybe there's something really need to be picking up on. um, so went through the process through the VA of trying to get things sorted out. Did my fair share of counseling. um, Total summary of we'll call them problems because I don't think they're real true uh, disabilities. Not that I love that particular label. Is a nightmare disorder caused by my PTSD, which feeds my anxiety, which can also be aggravated by my tinnitus and hearing loss. So all of those fun things mixed together really just kind of, if you don't know what you're doing, how to deal with it, don't, like Ashley said, educate yourself on how you can meet these issues face on. Um, Something that actually Ashley said, not I think on our last panel, is it's not learning, or basically you don't need to suffer with your disabilities, you need to learn how to live with them. And I don't think there's really a truer statement, whether it's a mental health problem or something else. Don't let yourself suffer, get educated, be aware, figure out what you need to do to surpass them, get over them, and make that plan actionable. And for me, it was really taking the time to do the counseling, put in the work, take care of myself physically as well as mentally, because they really do feed into each other. And then, avoiding your triggers if that's something that you have, or figuring out how you need to step back, take a breath if, you get into anxious situations. For me, big crowds and a lot of disorienting noises are really troubling for me. So, until I get to the point where I'm comfortable with that, I know to avoid it. And at work, for a lot of people, that can be extraordinarily different or difficult, because you might just be in an environment where that natural environment is something that might trigger you, might set you off, and might give you other problems. And I learned very early on, not specifically with my health, but the health of my wife, because I had to spend a year helping her get through cancer treatment, is that it takes a very open and honest and forward conversation with your boss to tell them what these issues are and how you need to navigate those problems, for you to be able to be productive with each other. So and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it hasn't been a quick or easy journey by any means. 8 years later, I'm still finding things out about myself and how these affect me and my mental health, but we're getting there.
Progress, right? It's one step at a time. CJ, do you mind sharing a little bit about your experience?
Of course. Um, Prior to me having injuries, I was rock climbing and doing martial arts and hiking and hunting and doing all these things. And then when I was injured, 14 surgeries later, I was trying to find a way that was different than what I used to be able to do. So that ended my military experience, and I was quite mad about that and quite sad about that, because both my parents were service and it was all I ever wanted to do. So that was an adjustment. But I got past that. It was when I had my dissection, my heart, my related heart attack, that things really became a bit of a struggle for me, because I was scared at first, and 911 was on my speed dial, and it was anything I do, from walking down the stairs to carrying groceries, I was afraid that it was going to happen again, because it was really scary when that event happened to me. And so I had to really seek some counseling at that point to make sure that, as my cardiothoracic said to me, and I'm blessed with her because she's a doctor. She's a PhD of philosophy in addition to being a surgeon, and she's a very great lady. And so she said, are you going to live with your heart condition, or are you going to become crippled by it? And she knew that that would make me mad and feel a challenge in that. And I said, no, of course, I'm going to go and do everything and more. And I have. And, I was blessed that she challenged me in that way. And now I just don't do those things. I'm not hiking or doing martial arts, but I'm doing different things. And I feel like at Central Square, I was brought to Central Square beyond the beautiful work that I get to do every day to be a part of the ERG and to, I hope now be someone in Ashley's life because she is my good friend, that when I hear her metronome ticking in a different way, I'm there to help her get it back to ticking the way it normally should and being a resource for her. And from the ERG, all of us talk to one another, and we've kind of been on the lookout for each other now, and others who are in our ERG or have spoken to us after events. And it's kind of amazing to be able to, share in that fashion in your work and with your friends, that you can be that resource for them. Not to quote Dr. Phil, but that soft place for them to fall, which is what he says quite often. And that I hope that that's happening for me. And I will find myself in moments where things really hurt, and then I have to say to myself, but you're still here and you can still do what you want to do, and do some exercises I have and some relaxation things that I have in order to feel better.
That's great, and really kind of like a great dovetail into the next question that we wanted to discuss of like how does this impact your professional life? And I think all of you kind of touched upon aspects of that where Ashley's like, well, actually the cool thing about anxiety is it's like exactly what you need as a project manager. And you touched, CJ, upon like how you can actually like support each other if you know this is like now a part of your identity at work. And Brian, you've kind of touched upon like talking to your manager about like the situations where you're able to do your best and the situations where maybe you're not. How does this impact kind of your day-to-day in the office? And then when you maybe have sort of harder situations or harder days, what are some of the ways that you guys work with your teams on still moving projects forward or meeting deadlines with the conditions that you have? Ashley, could you maybe tell us a little bit about how this is impacting your day-to-day?
Definitely. So every day is a learning experience for me. I have not always been very well balanced with my mental health and my work. And I have worked in places where they were not as understanding. My last job, I literally worked myself into a 911 call. I had been sick. My mental health is very impacted when my physical health is not at its peak. If I've not slept well, if I'm feeling under the weather, anything like that. And I also have asthma. So at that time, I was working 50 and 60 hours a week in a contract research organization that was industry and profit driven. I was the facility manager. My boss was down. We had some contractors down. I had not taken a day off. I was getting sick. It was affecting my asthma. And I went into the break room and looked at my boss and hit the floor. And next thing I know, paramedics were there. And I took one day off and went right back to work. It was not a healthy situation. It was not a healthy job. I did talk to my boss and his boss about having anxiety and needing those mental health days and needing that self-care. And the response I got was, oh, I get stressed too. And that's where it goes back to me hating the misnomer of anxiety disorder. So it took, I'm going to say, honestly, without getting too preachy, an act of God. A recruiter reached out to me about this job, and the company that I was working for decided they were going to close the facility that I was running due to some profit issues. And so I took this job at just the right time and have gotten to see the difference in a company that cares versus a company that does not. And when you see the memes and the quotes about, people leave companies, people leave their managers, everybody is replaceable, take that to heart. I don't want to encourage anybody here to not do your job or to quit, but if you're in a situation that is not healthy for you, be aware of it and either have that conversation to set those boundaries. And if people are not going to respect those boundaries, figure out a way to walk away, because that really affected me. That affected my family. That affected my whole body health. And really became a nightmare. It's 3 years with that company that I look back on, and um, I learned some lessons. I got some great skills, and I worked with some great people, but it was not good for me. And now I'm in a place where it is very supportive. If I need to hit up my boss and say, hey, I got to take a day, I can. This is the first time I've ever gotten to work remote 100%. And if I need to go chill out because, like CJ says, my metronome's getting a little out of whack, I can. I can go upstairs. I can go sit outside on these beautiful sunny days that we've been having. I can have a stretch session. I can control my schedule a lot better. So, you know, yes, I found ways to make the way that I think and the way that my mental health affects me make me a better employee, but I've also had to learn how to set boundaries. And I'm a people pleaser, and part of anxiety is literally carrying a blanket of guilt all the time. You weren't good enough, or you told somebody no, or, did I disappoint them? Did I hurt their feelings? Are they going to be able to find somebody else to replace that? Or, you constantly feel like you owe everybody everything, and you're just worried, and you're over analytical, and you're a giver. And one of the best books is The Best Yes by Lisa Turkers, is when to say yes, and that no is okay. And it took me a really horrible job and some really bad health experiences to learn that no is a good word. It's not a bad word unless it's coming from your toddler. So, you know, that's kind of where it comes from. It's know what you need and get that. Don't be a martyr, don't be a victim, don't sacrifice yourself for your job.
Right. It sounds like your lesson on like how it's impacted your professional life is like you've had your professional life like actually impact your personal life deeply, and you've had to kind of draw those boundaries a little bit more. That's a really important lesson. And Brian, could you share a little bit about how it's impacted your professional life?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of been in waves. My first few years out of the military, I was picking up random jobs that really had nothing to do with what I wanted to do. Wasn't until I got into a more professional setting the last few years, that just coincidentally is also the time I started to focus on my mental health. And so my previous job is when I just started going through counseling and meeting a therapist on a regular basis, and doing homework for cognitive behavioral therapy. And so for me, at a point where I felt like I was in a position that I was already underqualified for where I was, to put it plainly, and very intimidated by the level of responsibility that I had because it was very new to me. Um, it's hard for me in that position to go to my boss and say, hey, by the way, I'm just gonna, need a random day off because I got to go talk to my counselor. She's on the other side of town, and this just doesn't work out for my day. So I was basically shielding my entire work life from that. Could not make that public because I already felt like I was, teetering on the side of maybe I wasn't cut out for this to begin with. And then when I found the opportunity to come to CentralSquare 2 years ago, it was, to me, revelational, and love that transition. And from the get-go, even having to cycle through a bunch of different leaders for one reason or another, because my first boss retired, and then I got transferred from HR to finance, from finance to treasury, from treasury now to, just having to deal with the CFO. Um, it was a little chaotic, but even then, the overwhelming sense of support from just the natural environment made things a lot easier. Uh, the probably most stress that has ever been on me at a time was we shut down for the pandemic. I had to close 5 offices remotely without physically being able to be there to delegate work. My wife was diagnosed with breast cancer through the middle of it. Had to help her get through treatment while we were quarantined and shut down. Her cancer treatment was delayed, one of her surgeries put off. And then at the same time, she got COVID in the middle of this. And I was also working from home trying to take care of my elderly father-in-law who has Alzheimer's. So if that doesn't throw you through a loop, I'm not really sure what it will. And for me, it was specifically a very trying time, but being able to know that I can lean on, oddly enough, my employees to be able to help me out where I needed it because they're aware of what's going on. And then also letting my bosses know, hey, this is a situation. I'm really don't know what to do because I'm kind of out of options here. So um, this is where I'm at and this is what I need to do to get it done. And having their full on support to get me through that has really been, I think, an eye-opening experience. I didn't know companies could actually care like that, especially considering some of the past experiences that I've had. So um, it's gotten me to a much better place professionally. I think excelling above everything else. Once I finally got to the point where I was open and accepting of my situation, it helped me be better at my job because I know I don't have to shield stuff back anymore. I can be open about it. I can basically tell my boss how I'm going to be the most efficient employee there that I can be, because if you're holding those things back and you're hiding them and you're sheltering how you're having a hard time, whether it's personal or it's work related, it's going to affect your performance. Having that direct conversation and being open about it is really what's going to open things up for you at work at the end of the day, by you and your boss getting together and really coming up with a plan for how you can be the best employee.
That's great advice, and we'll dig into that a little bit more on the next question. But CJ, can you share a little bit about how this has impacted your life at work?
Sure. I joined CentralSquare and things were humming along. And it's, as Ashley and Brian have shared, quite a brilliant place to work. So I was super happy. And I was up in Ohio taking care of an event that had happened to my family. And then COVID hit. So suddenly I was sort of locked down in Ohio away from my home. And then my brother couldn't work because he does retail and that got shut down. And then because he couldn't work, he became super cranky boots. And so then I was in lockdown with the kindest, happiest person who was not acting that way in that moment. And so that added a lot of stress because I care about him so much and I didn't want him to be sad, but I couldn't undo COVID, and that's where we were. And at the same time at work, um, we were just having a lot of transitions, and my boss had sort of taken the company project dump truck and said, here is a whole lot of projects for you. And I got to take those on. And so it was like a super stressful time, but it was also a kind of exciting time because I was doing all these projects and making all of these great agency relationships, and that was making me happy. And so I think how it impacted me is to know that when my brother was not feeling it because he couldn't work, I could go talk to agency X, Y, or Z and know that they needed something from me that I knew I could provide and that I knew I would make them happy. Or I could create a project deliverable or something like that and put myself in a good mood. And it sort of was the COVID vaccine before there actually was a COVID vaccine. And that has worked for me.
That's uh, that's really helpful to kind of think about, setting those milestones and deadlines for yourself to just like put one foot in front of the other. So we can now move on to our next and probably last question before we turn it over for questions. But it's really how did you guys like approach these conversations to advocating for yourself? There's certainly stigmas associated with mental health. There is differing levels of ability to support people, and then there's also like the concern about the business's bottom line. So balancing all of those factors, how do you start these conversations if you do need that support? Ashley, could you kick us off on that?
So I think the keywords here are know thyself. We're going to go back to ancient Rome or Greece and remember that quote, hold that quote close to your heart, because if you don't know what you need, you can't ask for what you need. And if you need to take time to figure that out, take that time. There's nothing more important. And if you're not intentional about it, it's not going to happen. I kind of let life happen for a long time and found myself in a very dark place. And I had to kind of get that control back. And there are a lot of things in life you can't control. I still have serious manifestations with riding and driving. I have horrible anxiety going through the mountains. I have to take meds. My husband, who has an impeccable driving record, I scare him to death because I'm over there like almost in tears. And these are on roads, like I live very close to the Blue Ridge Mountains. And if you have ever had the exquisite opportunity to drive through those mountains and just look out over the scenery, I used to be able to do that and enjoy that. And I can't do that anymore. And so that's something I'm working on in therapy. But recognizing that's not the person that I want to be. This is the person that I want to be. And how to get there, how to get through those steps. Be mindful, be intentional, know your boundaries and stick with them. Learn that no is not a bad word, and sit down and have that conversation with the people around you. I lead a Girl Scout troop of 32 girls, kindergarten from to 10th grade. I have 5 co-leaders that all look to me as a mentor, and I have literally had to look at them and say, this is not a good mental health time. I need to take a step back. Can somebody help out with this event or this badge or whatever? And people will surprise you. They always amaze me, and they always do. And CJ's even spoken to it. We have had conversations where I've been vulnerable with her. In a remote environment where we're chatting or we're video talking or we're teamsing, I've been able to get to know this woman in the last year. I've never met her face to face. Hope to soon when she finally comes home. And we have talked about what are my triggers, what's going on. I can ping her on Slack and say, hey, can we just talk? And she can be there. I know that talk therapy helps me. I have learned from my processing with therapy and from just introspection and mindfulness that if I get it out of my head, and that might mean journaling, that might mean, bullet journaling, that might mean painting, that might be exercising, whatever it takes, do for you what you need to do. And when it comes to you're at your wit's end, you're getting burned out, take that time. I can't preach it more. I was one of those people, my last job, I cashed out 100 hours of vacation when I left.
Right.
I never took vacation time. And if I did, it was for a sick kid or if it was for an appointment,
It
know what
wasn't
you need
really
and ask
just
for
to
it.
kind of like pause and take a beat and and kind of like work on
No
yourself.
beach days, no sleep-in days. It was run days.
And
So
that is wonderful
just
advice.
be your own champion, because nobody will do it for you.
Yeah. Brian, I guess how did you approach these conversations and kind of like balance, all those perspectives and really kind of combat that stigma that you were mentioning you had in your first job?
Yeah, so it was a lot of the same situation when I got to CentralSquare of, not being sure how I fit into the picture exactly because, like I said, my boss retired. They didn't backfill his position. They just carried all his duties over to me, and I was very unsure of myself in the beginning. And 6 months into that job, by the time I was on my third boss, is when my wife got diagnosed with cancer, and um, going through the mental health arena that I went through at that time, um, didn't have a whole lot of choice of having that conversation with my boss. It was just going to happen one way or the other, whether I was explaining to him why I wasn't showing up, or I was going to be proactive and going to them and say, um, this is what's going on. These are the steps I need to take to make sure that I get my work done.
Yeah.
Kind of what I've always found, I think at least in my opinion, works best is um, you can't ever go to somebody with a handout or trying to just solicit for yourself. People, I think, generally aren't receptive to that, is my personal opinion. And this doesn't work for everybody, but when you're talking about a professional environment, or as an employee or even as a boss, going to people and saying, this is how I can be better for you, and making it a collaborative experience, and letting them know what's going to happen so that you're better enabled to help them out or help the company, or whatever it is. That's ultimately what the end result needs to be. Yes, your mental health is important. You know what you need to do for your mental health. How do you work on these things and still
Right.
be successful?
And when we were in the prep session before, like one of the things you said that really stuck with me is like, you were not asking for your boss to be your therapist. You were not asking for your boss to like jump in and solve your problems. You are just like asking for, or you're not even really asking for anything. You're just telling them how you do your best work.
Right.
And I think like that really kind of stuck with me, where like I think a lot of people miss that point. Like, you're not asking for anything, you're kind of telling in this advocacy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much aware that the people that I work with are not mental health counselors. They're not psychiatrists or doctors
Right.
or anything else. You're not going to have my solutions for you. So here's my list of solutions, and this is how we're going to work together. I mean,
Yeah.
it does not need to be as abrasive as I make it sound. I know it sounds probably a lot worse than those conversations actually carry out. But at the end of the day, it is you presenting an action plan just like you would for any other project. If
Right.
you're working on executing something, it's like, this is how these steps are going to carry out, and this is how it's going to work. And you having a mental health problem is no different than you working with somebody that speaks a different language, or working with somebody that has a different skill set. You are simply figuring out a way to produce the best work with the conditions as they are.
Right. And I guess with a couple minutes remaining to leave time for questions, CJ, can you kind of take us home with how you approach advocating for yourself?
Yeah, it'll be short and sweet. I wanted to be at CentralSquare very badly, and I knew that in order to be here, I had to make my boss aware of what was going on. So before I even got an offer, I told him, I have a heart condition and it will need treatment. And if I say I need to go, please trust that I need to go. And other than that, I will be a work demon for you. But when I say I need to go, you have to trust. And, you know, it's worked out that way, that in those moments where I've had to, I have. And otherwise, I've been just what I promised, driving and delivering my projects. And I did the same when I got stuck in Ohio with supporting my brother during the COVID. I said, you know, I've got to be up here. I've got to stay up here until I know that all is okay with him, and then I'll be home. But until then, I got to do what I got to do, and that has worked so far.
I think it's great advice. So turning it back to Hannah, who will take us into Q&A.
Yes, hello everyone. Excited to be a part of this conversation. I think that I'm shocked and I'm super impressed with everyone's vulnerability. Before we wrap today, we wanted to get through a lot more content, but this conversation was just so good. I couldn't steer it in any other direction. I wanted to let everyone chime in with their perspectives. So before we dive into like our panelist takeaways, I just want to give all of our attendees and whoever's watching this post-event an opportunity. Please reach out to our speakers, Sanj, our moderator, if you have any questions about working through this within your own organization. And we were also planning on getting through why mental health should be important to your business's bottom line and how to create a safe space for every divergence. So I think this event could have been like 2 more hours, but we're obviously not going to do that. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and give everyone the old school tweet length takeaway. So 140 characters or less. What do you want attendees to leave with today? Sanj, I'm actually going to kick it off. I'll do you last since you weren't prepared for this. Let's kick it off to Brian first. What's your tweet length takeaway for people?
Put me on the spot. Get to know yourself, figure out what you need, and figure out how to champion those needs at work.
Awesome. CJ, how about you?
Adaptable means adapting and being able, and do that every day when you need to.
Love that. Being adaptable is essential. Ashley, how about you?
I am not my disability, but I can be great because of it, and I can live every day with it.
Yes, I 100% support that and find that very relatable. And then Sanj, last but certainly not least.
You know, I think what I've really learned from this is your job is to help your team do their best work.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Totally.
now see all the times I really get in the way of that. And this has like opened my eyes to that.
It was secretly a therapy session for you, Sanj. Just kidding, just kidding. So thank you everyone so much for being a part of this. This was an awesome event. A huge, huge, huge thank you to Brian, CJ, and Ashley. You guys were so vulnerable today. That I know that's not easy. So we appreciate you being a part of this. And Sanj, thank you for moderating. Thank you for being a true MSPer. And I hope that you'll all join us for another session. And super exciting. We're sharing a resource document we've put together. It's about 3 pages long of a bunch of resources you can use for yourself and your team building ERGs within your own organization. So we'll share that in our follow-up today. And I just want to say a huge thank you again. You're all awesome. Cheers.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.